So welcome to Behind the Keyboard and our very first episode. We're very excited to have you join us. A little bit of housekeeping. There will be Q&A at the end, so please type your questions for Eileen in the chat box, and then we'll feed through that towards the end of today's chat. BTK, Behind the Keyboard, is a monthly author interview series, and we're taking a peek at authors behind their keyboards and bringing that peek into your living rooms. A combination of an author reading, a glimpse of the author behind their keyboard in an intimate fireside chat, a mini workshop, and a chance to ask your questions. I'm Nicolle Brown, writer of Psychological Suspense, owner and creator of Behind the Keyboard, and one of your hosts. I have three passions: bringing people together, supporting and encouraging others in their development, and writing, of course. I've been doing those things for over 10 years in various arenas, and I'm excited to bring bits of those to the writing community via BTK. Joining me as host as well is Cynthia.
Hi, so I'm Cynthia Sharp. I'm an author, poet, and former radio host. I'm happy to be back on the airwaves with writers. That's one of my main passions. I'm currently the City of Richmond's writer-in-residence, and when not behind my own keyboard, I love walking the seawall and through the rainforest.
Thanks, Cynthia. Our very special guest today is Eileen Cook. Eileen is a multi-published author, with her novels appearing in 9 languages. I think that's very cool. Her books have been optioned for film and TV. She spent most of her teen years wishing she were someone else or somewhere else, which is great training for a writer. She's an instructor/mentor with the Creative Academy and Simon Fraser University's Writers Studio program, where she loves helping other writers find their unique story to tell. Eileen lives in Vancouver and has 2 very naughty dogs. Welcome, Eileen. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Totally our pleasure. So we're going to launch right into hearing an excerpt of your You Owe Me a Murder, released in March 2019. Can you tell the listeners a bit about what it's about and about the piece you're going to read for us today?
Of course. So first off, I'm going to apologize ahead of time. I have tried to bribe my dogs into silence, but they may have to chime in as we go. So I'm excited to read from You Owe Me a Murder. This is my most recent novel. It was inspired by my love of all things Alfred Hitchcock and Patricia Highsmith. And it is basically, if you ever had the opportunity to either see or read Strangers on a Train, which is one of Highsmith's great stories, which is about, of course, a murder pact. So this tells the story of 2 girls. There is Kim, my main character, and she meets Nikki, no relationship to Nicolle, in the airport here in Vancouver. And on this trip, Kim is quite devastated because her boyfriend has dumped her and is now on this school trip over to London, England with his new girlfriend, and she's stuck along with them. So she's sort of devastated, and she ends up meeting Nikki in this airport, and they begin chatting. And through the course of that, mayhem ensues. So I'm going to read first just the tiny little prologue, which is very short, and then I'm going to jump into a scene fairly early in the novel where they are still at the airport, and Kim and Nikki have made the decision to steal some alcohol from the duty-free to sort of liven up the flight to come. So first, from the prologue. North American Student Scholars for Change. Our summer programs are formulated to show the world to your exceptional teen. Designed for high academic achievers with an interest in expanding their worldview, our programs have been called life-changing. Our trips combine the opportunity to view art, architecture, and learn about history with a world-class guide, and your child will develop his or her independence and maturity while building friendships that will last a lifetime. And then from the scene. So picture, if you can, if you've been in the airport, this sort of opportunity. Every muscle in my body clenched as I walked over the threshold, anticipating the piercing alarm going off, but nothing happened. Nikki gripped my elbow. Don't look back. Only guilty people look behind them. My neck stiffened and I kept moving forward down the hall. The adrenaline that had rushed through my system seconds ago was now bailing ship, and I felt lightheaded. My bag weighed 100 pounds. I half expected every person we passed to develop X-ray vision, see through my tote, and point me out as a shoplifter. Nikki seemed to sense I was barely holding it together, and she pulled me along until we reached an empty gate area. We both started giggling as we dropped into the row of seats. I can't believe I did that. I opened up the bag, expecting the vodka to be missing, a figment of my imagination, but the bottle was there. I glanced quickly at Nikki to see if she was impressed that I had actually done it. Nikki patted the side of my leather bag. You were perfect. I shook my head. Are you kidding? As soon as I took the bottle, all I wanted to do was run for it. I felt like I was going to freak out. She laughed. But you didn't. Being good at something doesn't mean that it isn't hard or scary. It just means you keep moving forward when other people quit. I tend to be a quitter. I'm scared of everything. Like what? I rolled my eyes. I could make a list a mile long. For starters, I'm terrified of heights. I can't even go to my grandparents' new condo in Miami because they live on the 20th floor. And when things scare me, I'm usually the first one to bail. I won't go skiing, kayaking, or any place that looks like it might have spiders. And I get hives when I go to the dentist. And my dad is a dentist. Nikki wrinkled up her nose. Now I get the dentist phobia, but heights? If you're going to be scared of something good. She laughed. You were scared to take the liquor, but you did it. That's the difference between ordinary people and extraordinary. Extraordinary people might be afraid, but they do it anyway. My chin lifted slightly in the air. The shame over stealing was mixed up with pride in doing something risky. I wanted to brag about what I'd done and apologize all at the same time. Most of all, I wanted her to keep talking to me. I still can't believe I did it. I wanted her to understand I wasn't someone who did things like this. Heck, I wasn't someone who did things at all. But maybe it's as simple as deciding that I didn't want to be that person anymore. Nikki threw an arm around me. Think about it. I wonder what you might do if you let yourself really go. You know, every accomplishment starts with the decision to try, and then keep trying, even when it's hard. I packed up what she said and placed it carefully into my memory. It struck me that her advice was important, not because I wanted to become a master criminal. I felt really bad about taking the booze and couldn't imagine doing it again. But I liked that I'd done it at least once. Been like Nikki, daring, not afraid. She seemed to have figured out the secret to life. All the brochures for a student scholars program had stressed how travel would make a person grow, and I secretly thought it was a bunch of marketing bullshit. How could a change in geography make a difference? But maybe it was possible. I could evolve into someone else. The public address system squawked and announced that our flight would be boarding. I couldn't believe how quickly the hours had flown by. I pulled the bottle slightly from my bag. Do you want this? You keep it. I don't know the whole story with the guy and the girl back at the gate, but I suspect you need it more than me. She pushed herself up. We should get going. I reached for her arm before she started to walk away. Thanks. I was feeling really down. That's what friends are for. She poked me in the side as if I were being silly. Well, I appreciate you making me a friend after only a few hours. Nikki smiled. Don't you know? I decided we were friends the instant we met. Thank you.
Riveting. You owe me a murder with a compelling story. And Kim and Nikki are such dynamic characters. Eileen, I know you have a background in psychology. I'm wondering how that's influenced the way you develop characters like Kim and Nikki.
It's had a huge impact. I wanted to be an author from when I was little, but my parents are incredibly practical people. So they were very insistent that I go to school for something that I could get a quote unquote real job in, because playing with your imaginary friends doesn't count as real. So I went in for counseling and psychology. And fundamentally, I think that writers and counselors have a huge amount of crossover in that we're both fascinated with what people do and why they do it. And so I found that I've used a lot of my counseling training to help me with character development and thinking about how people do what they do, why they do it, what motivates them. And I liked it so much that, in fact, I recently wrote a book called Build Better Characters, which comes out October 1st, which is all about psychology theory for character development.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I just have a question in there, Eileen. Oh, which friend were you? Because we all had that friend, either, you know, the one that tempted us and brought us out of our shell, or vice versa.
I think it's interesting because people often confuse me and think that I'm an extrovert, because I am actually one of the very strange and bizarre people who actually enjoys public speaking. But the truth is, I am a total introvert. My very best friend, who, for clarity, I never wanted to murder or encouraged me to murder anyone, is a wonderful woman named Laura. And she was definitely the outgoing one. So she was the one who got invited to parties, always had a boyfriend, and I was sort of like the added bonus. So whenever she was dating someone, she would always make sure that they had somebody who would go out with me. So I was definitely the donkey to the Shrek, the Watson to the Sherlock, instead of being the main character.
All righty. Thanks for the reading. Now, part of Behind the Keyboard, BTK, and the fireside chat portion is to get a bit closer to the person. You've already started giving us a glimpse to that. I love it. So to the person behind the stories. So we're sitting with some questions ever since we knew that you were going to be one of our speakers. We would like to know about you as a person on the writer's journey, on your own journey, the you kind of behind the keyboard. So when you and I were chatting over the summer about being a guest today, you had mentioned that you were foraying into nonfiction. So I'm supposing that's the Build Better Characters. You've got many facets to your writing career already: author, teacher, mentor, speaker, and now nonfiction. What's it been like for you to kind of like be in fiction and then going into nonfiction?
I really enjoy it. I mean, certainly one of the challenges is with fiction, you can make up whatever you like, which is the beautiful thing. But with nonfiction, they actually don't allow you to do that. You actually have to be able to have something to say. Having said that, one of my great joys is teaching writing. I've been an instructor with SFU for a period of time, and I've also worked with the Creative Academy, which is an online group that I co-host with two other phenomenal writers, Crystal Hunt and Donna Barker. And as a part of that, I spend a lot of time talking with writers and about character creation. And it seemed to me that it was time to write it down. And it was that wonderful experience of the more I wrote it down, the more I realized it was an actual book, and that the content was useful and helpful. I'm a bit of a craft book junkie. I have, I don't know, give or take maybe 100 of them on my shelf. So I'm very excited to kind of join that bookshelf.
And what's your go-to book on that shelf of 100?
So many. Certainly my favorite, just to reread over and over again, is On Writing by Stephen King. And that's both because I find his story just so inspirational and so direct, and he has such a lovely voice. You sort of feel like you're having a fireside chat, I guess, with him as well, which I enjoy. And I think in terms of the one I probably go the most used to for exercises is Don Moss's Writing the Breakout Novel. And I've had the opportunity to hear Don speak several times at the Surrey International Writers Conference. And I've also been to one of his weekend workshops. And I really enjoy his prompts and his ways of sort of challenging you to look at your manuscript in a different way. And I will freely admit and give full credit to him that I stole the idea of having lots of those prompts in my own book.
I'm sure you won't mind. Okay, you've already alluded to your path in psychology. So I'd like to know, we'd love to know, when was the moment you realized that you were kind of going from a counseling professional path and that you needed to go down the writer's path, like that moment, that aha that you felt inside yourself?
And I don't know if it was a moment. I mean, I can say that being a writer was always my passion. I enjoyed counseling. I think I was reasonably good at it. I liked working with the clients. I liked the people. I liked the challenge. But if you had said to me at any point in that, you know, would you rather be writing full time? I definitely would have raised my hand for the writing full time uh, target and goal. But it just simply wasn't financially possible for a period of time. And I think it's really useful for writers to understand that you may get lucky, and you know, good on you if you can, where you can come out of the gate, sell your first book for sufficient money, and be off to the races. But the truth of the matter is, for most writers, it's a slog to reach a point where you are sort of self-sufficient with a writing income. And it usually has to do with having a number of books out, so you can sort of build some of that momentum. And it's always a roller coaster. There's been some interesting articles recently about a writer was talking about, you know, having one, or I shouldn't say one, earned several large advances and then suddenly being dropped by her publishing house and having to sort of start all over again. And unfortunately, those stories aren't unfamiliar to me. So I think it's important for writers to remember this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I would say I was very fortunate because in my particular journey, I had a very understanding employer who was very excited for me and what I was doing. And the nature of the work that I did, I was able to slowly go down. So I wrote my first 3 books while working full time, and then slowly started cutting down, where I was working 4 days a week, then 3 days a week, then 2 days a week, then as a consult only, until about 4 years ago when I sold the book with Malice, and decided to make the leap at that point to full-time writing and teaching.
So it's interesting to hear the professional steps you took and how carefully you laid it out. It's everyone's dream, I think, to just leave our day job and be a writer. I'm wondering, was there a panic moment during that transition? And if there was, how did you get through it?
I love that you think there was just one moment of panic.
I'm the queen of panic. That's why I need to know.
I'm a frequent panic flyer. I think there were several moments where I wondered if I was making the right decision. And I think there is a certain amount of leap of faith that comes into it. But I did feel that I had put as much in place as possible to support that success. So I had saved and stockpiled, and this sounds very boring, but please allow me to channel my accountant dad. I had stockpiled several months of earnings. When I got a fairly significant advance, I used that to basically pay off my home, to cut my sort of monthly living expenses. And so I was doing everything I could to sort of do that. But I would say I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night with the cold sweats and wondering, you know, will I be here a year from now? And I don't know. But what I do know is that I'm not going to give up. And so that gives me a certain amount of confidence that I can sort of keep moving towards that goal.
Wow, so if not giving up really helped ground you, is there anything else you can share with our audience about what helped you stay firm to your path?
So certainly one of the things that was most helpful for me, and I've given credit before, but Canadian storyteller Ivan Coyote was one of my creative writing instructors. And Ivan pulled me aside very early on and said, you know, you're pretty good at this writing thing. You should be sending your stuff out. I think you'd get published. And I shared with Ivan that I'd sent stuff out tons of times and all I've been is rejected. And I didn't know if I could face being rejected anymore. And any writer, I'm sure, who is listening to this will know that feeling of rejection all too well. The dreaded, dear writer, thank you so much, where they don't even use your name. All of those things, and they tend to sort of pile up in your inbox and sort of drag you down. And I was trying to remember Stephen King with his spike and his, you know, stack of rejection letters, but it was hard. And I felt often like giving up. And Ivan said to me, you know, here's a news flash, Eileen, you're already not published. So the worst thing that would happen is that you still won't be published. And that's very simple advice, but it was a light bulb moment for me where I realized that I might never reach my goals or dreams. I might never become the next, Gillian Flynn or Stephen King or, insert favorite author here kind of person. But I know what will happen is it's not just going to happen by accident. If that does come to pass, it will be because I continued to work, that I continued to get back up when I got knocked down, and that I would just keep moving forward. Because if you give up, I can guarantee you won't make it. I don't know for anyone in this room if you're going to be successful writer, whether that's indie or traditional. I can't tell you that. I've read hundreds, probably thousands of points of manuscripts at this time. And I can sometimes tell that one is stronger than another, but still you look in publishing and some things excel when you kind of wonder what the heck, and others don't. But I do know any writer who gives up isn't going to make it. So persistence pays off.
Thank you.
So just listening to your story, and when it comes to making transitions from one profession to another, one financial kind of like our income to another, and taking those risks. I've been reading up a lot about purpose lately. And so I'm wondering for yourself, and maybe this has helped keep you on track as well, but what is your purpose as a writer?
And I love that question. And it's interesting. One of my colleagues, Donna Barker, she can drive you crazy because she will always ask people, what's your why? Why do you need to tell that story? Why are you the one to tell that story? But I think it's actually an excellent question. And, one of the exercises that she has people do is write down the why, and then keep it in their office someplace so that on the days that it's hard, you can sort of reread that why and remember what it is. Fundamentally for me, the why is sort of a two-part, which is I have a passion for reading. I have read stacks and stacks of books since I was little. And I want to write books that do the same for others, that take them away, that entertain them. Nothing gives me more joy than someone who says, oh, I meant to go to bed last night at 10 o'clock, but I had to just finish your book and I was up till 2 a.m. Apparently I like making people sleep deprived, but something about that just fills me with great glee. So if I can write a book that is entertaining, then I feel like I have won. And then the second part of that is a personal why, which is one of the things that I enjoy about writing is it gives you a chance to explore whatever issues are of interest to you. And I think what's interesting is often we may not even be aware of it. I was several books in when I was speaking on a panel at a conference, and one of the people stood up and said, all of your books fundamentally deal with deciding with who you really are as an individual. And I'm curious why that's such an important theme for you. And I had this moment of shock where I was like, holy shit, every book I've ever written is about who you really are. And I hadn't realized that because, of course, they're all sort of different in different ways. But clearly that's a question that I am still digging away at and coming to terms with who are we when we're under pressure? Who are we separate from our family? Who are we when things are bad? Those are the things that interest me, and I love the opportunity to explore it.
I love that idea of finding your why. I think that's such a powerful thing for all of us to do. And I'm wondering, coming from a counseling background, do you have any suggestions for people who are still finding their why, how to go about it?
I think there are a couple of different things. One of my favorite things to do, and I think this came from my colleague Crystal, is she had me sit down and write an email from an imaginary reader in the future, writing to me, thanking me for writing the book and why it meant so much to them. And that was just a really interesting exercise around thinking about what was it that I wanted to do and why. And for other people who are struggling with their why is to give yourself some time and space to ruminate on it. I'm a big fan of keeping a journal. So ask yourself and just free write and see what comes out of that. Look at what kind of books that you read and what intrigues you about that book. But most of the writers that I know, there is something, and that's why we kind of keep going back, because there are certainly far easier things to do. Certainly Netflix is calling. I can't be the only person who would rather at times do that. So people who are getting up early or staying late or working on their weekends to put words on the page, you're already doing it for a reason. So just dig a little deeper and figure out what that is.
I absolutely love those ideas. They resonate for me as well, to stick up something up above my computer desk that calls me back over the Unbelievable series or something like that. A little shift as a writer. So like in every career path or when we follow our passion, often something needs to be given up. So there's two parts. First, we all give up something to make time for writing, like giving up the Zumba class or okay, I'm going to write tonight instead of watching Netflix, right? So we don't want to know about that. We actually want to know what you had to let go of to become a writer. So what did you have to sacrifice in order to pursue your path as a full-time writer, speaker, teacher?
It sounds gonna sound strange because people say, why would you even have to worry about giving that up? But what I had to give up was fear. And I had to let go of the idea that not everyone was going to like my writing. There was going to be rejection. There were going to be people who didn't like what I wrote. There were going to be people who felt the need to share that with me, either online or, in a book review. And that scared me. I didn't want to put myself out for that. And I read a very interesting thing that said, if you're afraid of what other people are saying about you, it's probably because you're afraid that what they're saying is actually giving voice to your biggest fears. So you hate the bad review because your biggest fear is that your book actually did suck. You hate the rejection from an agent because part of you fears you actually deserved to be rejected. And that was interesting to me because it's that thing when there's someone where you actually care not at all about what they think, it's because you're probably confident in that area. I am just a walking ball of insecurity. And I pretty much always have been, and I, hope to someday get that together, but I haven't yet. So for me to move forward as a writer, I had to let go of fear and to understand that it would be a scary journey at times and it would be painful at times. And yet I had to keep going.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, what is your greatest blessing for having gone down this path?
My greatest blessing is this is my dream job. This is what I've always wanted to do. I've told this story before, so some people have heard it, but when I was very young, I used to go to the library and I would run my hands along the shelf and I would sort of look for the spot where my book would go someday. And I would shove my hand in there and push everybody off to the side just a little tiny bit because I wanted to imagine my book there. And one day I came in and there was already a space. And my school librarian came over and whispered in my ear, "I'm leaving space for you." And she's the first person I can ever remember that wasn't related to me, supporting my idea of writing. And for me, the first time that I, walked into a Chapters bookstore and I was actually on the shelf was magical. The first time that I heard from a reader who was not someone that I was sleeping with or best friends with or related to, who was saying, "Hey, I gave good money for your book and I liked it." I could write on that forever. That is just magical still.
That's such a beautiful image of that dream. And also I get inspired going into stores like the kids bookstore and seeing an Eileen cookbook and thinking, I know her. She taught me. We have one last question for you in this part before you help us set goals for the season. We'd love to know, who is your secret writing crush?
We need to know.
We need to know.
We need to know. Oh, there's so many. Probably Neil Gaiman. Just because, one, I enjoy his writing. Good Omens is one of my favorite books of all time. And anytime I've had interaction with him, and I don't mean like I've actually met him personally, but where I've had a chance to read an interview with him or any of those things, I'm just so inspired by his approach. Like, I think he's just a fascinating person. So Neil Gaiman, maybe a touch of Stephen King, which again is odd because I don't write horror, but I just find him and his ability to do voice fascinating. Gillian Flynn, can I just keep adding? I suppose I can't. I'm very polyamorous in the writer crush area, monogamous and other things, but with writing crushes, I have many.
Oh, wonderful. That's great. Okay, so it's so wonderful. Thank you so much for us to get a peek at you, Eileen, behind your keyboard. And thank you so much for sharing all that. Now, I know you've got a treat for us today. I know you've prepared something as we're all back into fall. So we're going to turn it over to you now to guide us through setting up our learning plans for the new season.
So first off, I am a huge fan of back to school timeframes. So I don't know if there are other people in this room who are also compulsive school supply shoppers, but I suspect I'm not the only one. And there was something wonderful about going back to school with your brand new backpack and all your shiny things, and all your classes were starting fresh. And one of the things that would frequently happen is there would be some kind of behind the scenes, you may not have been aware of it, but your teachers were creating some type of a learning plan. And what I want to encourage people to do is to remember that we are all still on that journey. I mean, the one wonderful thing about writing, and possibly discouraging thing about writing, is that you're never done. When I look at the very first book that I had published, which is not to say the very first book that I have ever written, there were 4 of those that never saw the light of day, but the very first book that I had published was a book called Unpredictable. And I had done, I don't even know, countless drafts of that book. You know, my agents weighed in and made editorial changes, and we worked on it. And then it finally went to the publishing house. It was with Penguin Berkeley, and they made changes. And I remember when that book came out thinking that it was about as close to perfect as it could ever be. And that lasted all until about, 2 days after it was out, when I realized that there were still things I would change. And when I read it now, over a decade since I wrote it, I can see so many ways that I could have made that book better. So the good news is for writers is we can always get better. So the people who've had the fortune or misfortune of having me as an instructor know that one of the things that I'm very keen on is actually having writers do a self-evaluation plan. And part of this comes from when I worked as a counselor, I was the manager of my department by the time that I left. I had a staff of 22 people that I worked with. And one of the things that I was a huge believer in was doing yearly performance reviews. Not just because people all wanted to know if they were getting a raise, but of course they did, but because I think there's something very valuable in taking the time to pause, determine where you're at, and then setting up a plan to improve in the areas that you want to improve on. And that was really, for me, the goal was I never wanted someone to have a performance appraisal where everything said exceeded expectations, because then you were in the wrong job. If you're doing everything perfectly, then you're not growing and learning. So I created a writer's self-evaluation guide, and I do have it as a handout that I can make available to people in this room if they're interested. I'll just need your email address. Eventually, it's going to be on our Creative Academy website, but we are rehauling it, and they didn't get that part finished yet. So if you wait till a little bit later in October, it'll be on our website. But otherwise, if you send me your email or put that in the chat window, I can collect those up and send those. So the writer's self-evaluation, what you would see if you had it in front of you, which you don't, is that we have 5 different areas that we're looking at. So we've broken them down now to a few. So I look at motivation, which is sort of thought to action, community, which is action to celebration, craft, which is idea to manuscript, publication, which is manuscript to book, and career, which is book to business. And I think the nice thing you'll find is that you will go in circles with these, so you never really complete. But what you would see when you take this evaluation is you rank yourself on a score of 1 to 10. And motivation has things like discipline, that you're getting your butt in the seat and you're writing at least some amount of things based on a timeline. You know your schedule of when you're going to write. You have your writing mechanics down, so you have the basic grammar, those kinds of things. You'll love this, Cynthia. We have in there, you have to identify your why. So we're encouraging people to do that.
Wonderful.
I thought you'd be happy. And a lot of those motivation things I've actually changed and expanded since my colleague Donna wrote her book, which is called Writing the Scrappy Rough Draft. So we have a shared love of science. So she's gone down the rabbit hole looking at different kinds of research around how do you get yourself motivated? Because everyone here is motivated. Everyone here, you wouldn't be giving up time on a Thursday night to talk about writing if you weren't motivated. So how do you get out of your own way? So that's what that section's worried about. There's a small section around identifying community. And all I'm really going to say about that tonight is writing is a very lonely occupation. You're doing it at home, which in some ways is what I love best about it. I love time at home with my dogs, but it's also lonely. So you do need a community. And that might be an online group. That might be an in-person writing group. That may be just one writing critique partner that you work with over and over again, but you need to have that group there. And the second part of this section is identifying kind of mini milestones. So at the Creative Academy, we do sort of regular retreats, which are every 12 weeks. And we're really encouraging people to sort of just think in some ways in those 12-week chunks and identifying, you know, if your goal is, I want to write a mystery novel, what in your mystery novel could you get done in the next 12 weeks? So if you were looking at a calendar, basically right now we're talking about what could you get done between now and the middle of December? And then writing that down so that you can kind of track your progress. And an important part of that is then celebrate your progress. It's so important to celebrate those mini milestones, because if you're waiting to celebrate until you go into chapters and see your book on the shelf, it's going to be a long haul, and a lot of people get discouraged. And from a psychological standpoint, we actually know people who get intermittent reinforcement continue to do better. So you need to kind of set those up for yourself, whatever that is, however you want to celebrate. My colleague Crystal has my new favorite way. She buys those little mini bottles of champagne. You can get, it's like a glass and a half, lest you think that she's, you know, completely pickled. It's just a tiny little snort of champagne. And she puts on masking tape on the outside of it, like kind of her next goal. So it might be the title of a novella, or it might be 30,000 words, or it might be redoing the website, like whatever her target is. And then she has it there and she can crack that open when she's ready. So know your celebrations. The craft part of the performance evaluations may be the longest, and that's probably because crafty is all my favorite things. But it's thinking about and taking a hard look at what is it you do well and where is it that you need to improve. So for myself, what was quite interesting when I first started writing is that I wrote humor well. And when I was getting rejections, and I got plenty with my earlier projects, people would sometimes write, you know, the plot isn't working, or this has got a problem, I didn't connect with your characters, but the humor was spot on. And I always sort of shrugged that off and acted like it didn't matter, which is interesting, because to me, it was like, well, because that part came easy for me, then it wasn't valuable, then it wasn't important. But what I have learned is that my ability to write humor and use a sense of humor allows me to bridge other areas that might be more challenging. So if you're great at dialogue, it's important that you know that so that you can rely on it. If you're great at pacing, it's important that you know that. And conversely, if you're not as good in a particular area, being honest with yourself that there's a weakness allows you to zoom in and focus in on that particular area. When I first started writing, and in fact, even after I first published, the biggest challenge for me was plotting. And this could be, I was a bit of a pantser at the time. I wanted to write murder mysteries, but I just couldn't seem to actually make them mysterious. Unfortunately, everyone could always identify my killers very early on. So I identified for myself that, while I was really good at dialogue and was good at humor, I was good at character development. One area that I was really weak in was plotting. And so then I set up a learning objective to get better on that. If your goal is just, I want to get better, the problem is you have no focus for that. So if you can identify, you know what, I really need to work on plotting, or I really need to work on dialogue, or I really need to work on revision, then you can set that up. You can identify, is there a conference that deals with that particular topic? Out of the 6 zillion craft books that you may have, is there one that would be better than another? And you can sort of start to track and focus in. And when we focus on something, we're much more likely to get the results that we're looking for. So a big part of your learning plan for me is to sit down, know what you're doing really well and what it is you want to work on. The next part of the evaluation is publication, which is sort of manuscript to book. And for myself, I think one of the most exciting things happening right now is that we have so many options. You can traditionally publish, you can indie publish, you can do a hybrid and do a little bit of both. It is so wonderful for writers to have so many more options than we used to have. But, with many options comes great responsibility, to butcher a Spider-Man quote. So it's equally as important that you sort of understand your own goals with that, and you sort of targeted what it is you want to do and what steps you need to do. Because as we're starting to go from writing into these last 2 sections, you realize that now you're taking it to the business level. So writing you can do for yourself, and that's great. You may choose never to want to send your book out. It's just the process of you writing it. But once you say to another person that you want to exchange money for your writing, you have to start thinking of it like a business. And the publishing section is dealing with that. And then the very last section on our performance evaluation is career, which is book to business. And that's the idea that, and again, I may be talking to only a few people or to most people, if all you want to do is write one book, and I do know some people that have a particular book that they really want to do, they have a story they want to tell, but once they've told that story, they're done. For other people, possibly many people in this room, you're looking for a career, in which case you need to start thinking about all sorts of things like, do you have a social media plan? Do you know what that looks like? Do you have a website? Do you know what it is that you want to achieve? Do you have a budget? Have you ever sat down and said to yourself, how much can I spend on writing this year? And then think about where's the best way to spend that. So if you want to go to something like the Surrey International Writers Conference, which is one of my favorites, I'll vouch for that. It's not a cheap conference. I think it's about $600 for the 3 days. It's well worth it, but it's certainly not inexpensive. So if you're going to do that, you may need to put your whole budget into that. Or maybe you're going to take an MFA or the SFU Writers Studio program. But an MFA, I think at UBC is around $40,000. Like, if you thought the conference is expensive, that's nothing. So you need to set a budget with the idea that you are setting some clear goals in the same way you would with any other business. Where are you going to put your focus and energy into the business of writing? And so those are all the sections that are in the self-evaluation. And what I'm asking people to do when they take that is, one, just to be honest, because it's only relevant in terms of what's important to you, and then to do it on a regular basis. When I'm teaching for SFU, I make them do it 3 times over the course of the year, at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end. But you can really do it anytime. And I think it's just that chance to sort of sit down and refocus. Again, we're big believers in kind of every 12 weeks, which is sort of quarterly, sitting down and doing that review of where you are. And that's because things change. And when you set goals that are over a course of a whole year, the problem is it's really easy to get lost in the woods. But if you look at the next 12 weeks, I'm willing to bet most of us in this room, you sort of know what's ahead in the next 12 weeks. You know if there's a vacation planned or you have family coming to visit. You know that Thanksgiving is going to be in there. You can start figuring out what you can reasonably do. And it's also a short enough time period that if it gets away from you and you have to rejig, you've only lost 12 weeks versus a year. So the one thing I just want to stress with this is, whether it's this evaluation or some other way, remember that writing is a craft, but publishing is a business. And if you're wanting to go into the business aspect of things, you need to have a business plan, and spend some time thinking about that, and you will find yourself far more successful. And that's what I had to tell you today.
Thank you so much, Eileen. I know as we're going into the fall, I'm also working on my own learning plan. And one of the things that's really helped me is always being accountable. I sign up either through the Creative Academy, or I actually still stay in touch with writers that I had met through my writers group in France, where I was for 12 years, and we still meet up on a Sunday. And I'm always astonished when one person's able to like give way more feedback on structure or something. And I'm like, I know what I'm confronted with, something I didn't know that I needed to learn more about. And that kind of feeds me, feeds my next goal, if you will.
I can't stress that enough. Like, having a community of people who both encourage you and also push you. So kind of a nice mix of stick and carrot is what you're looking for. And I think it's hard. Sometimes we can get surrounded by people who are tearing down our dreams. And unfortunately, it's a lot easier to tear down someone else's dream than it is to build your own. So getting the right people is important.
Yeah, I tend to get those people out as quickly as possible, diplomatically, of course. So it looks like we do have some questions coming in. Cynthia, can you give us one of the first questions for Eileen?
So Julia has an excellent question. She's taking the Writer Studio and she's writing both fiction and nonfiction. And her question for Eileen is, what has been your biggest challenge in moving from fiction to nonfiction? And Julia's wondering, is it voice or narrative or style or something else? She writes both and finds them extremely challenging in different ways.
They are. Thank you for that question, Julia. It is a challenge sometimes to go back and forth. And in fact, one of the things that I discovered is I wrote a draft of my nonfiction book and I wasn't happy with it. And when I went back to it, I realized what was missing for me was my voice. I was trying to make it almost too textbooky, if that's, I think I just made that word up, too textbooky. And it wasn't as much of a conversation. And I wanted to create a book that was more of a conversation about character, that still had meat and content. Because if you're asking someone to spend money on a novel, then I think the deal is that you will entertain them. If you're asking someone to spend money on nonfiction, then it's almost double, because they're wanting to be entertained and educated. So it ups the bar just that one extra level. And I feel I was defaulting too much to education and not enough on entertaining. So trying to find that balance, I think, was it.
I don't see any other questions yet, but I have one that's been burning. Oh, wait. Might be one right here. Melissa says, I feel stuck in my writing lately, and I'm hoping setting some new goals for myself will get me back on track. Oh, she's just saying some great things about you. Good luck with it. She said, I don't have a question in particular, but your chat tonight's been inspirational, and a lot of people have been saying that. But I might squeeze in one of my burning questions. When I was reading You Owe Me a Murder, I was wondering if Kim was an unreliable narrator, and I was wondering what it was like to write a potentially unreliable narrator.
Oh, well, two things. So I'm gonna first just jump onto Melissa's thing for just one moment, and then I will do unreliable. And my dog has a thought about that as well. So for Melissa, what I would say is everybody gets stuck. So don't feel bad about that. It's totally normal. I don't know a writer out there who hasn't been up, down, and back up and down again. So I think you're doing exactly what you need to do, which is sit back down and remember why you like this. It's too easy to get discouraged. So remember there was a reason you wanted to write, and then set those goals. And then find a way, and this sounds like a weird thing to say, but set the bar low. I think too often what we do is we're like, I'm going to get back into writing and I'm going to write 2,000 words a day, 7 days a week, and I'm going to pump this bad boy out by this date. And then a week goes by and we haven't done it, and we think like, wow, I'm a loser. And we quit all over again. So what I would encourage you to do, Melissa, as weird as it sounds, is set that bar low, something that you know that you can achieve. And then do that. And when you're feeling really good and confident because you're hitting that, and that might be, I'm going to do 1,000 words a week. And once you're doing that and you're hitting it or you're exceeding it, then kind of up it. And then to Cynthia's question, so this is my counselor and speaking, is I hate to tell all of you, but you're actually all unreliable. Every single person here is an unreliable narrator, because the truth of the matter is that we filter all experience through our own lens. So in my book, one of the things that I talk about, which is a counseling theory, don't worry, there's not a test on this, called rational emotive therapy. And what you do want to remember from rational emotive therapy is A, B, C. So A is the activating event, B is your belief about that event, and C is the consequence. So if A, the activating event, is you walk into a room, everyone's laughing. When they see you walk in, they stop laughing. That's what's happened. B is your belief about that. So if you believe they were all talking about me, that will impact C, your consequence, which is what you do. So you might storm out of the room, or maybe you start yelling at everyone like they're horrible people. How dare they make fun of you? Or maybe it's quiet and you just drift away and you never come back. But the truth of the matter is your belief may not be right. It's equally as possible that they were laughing at you, or you just happened to come in when the joke ended and there was nothing about it at all. Or maybe they're all super impressed with you. If you need any proof of this ABC, talk to siblings if you have them about major family events, and talk about how things went down, and you'll find that you have very different memories of those situations. So yes, my character, she's an unreliable narrator, but she's not lying, other than she's dealing with what she can accept and what's going on. So everything she sees is filtered through that. So keep that in mind.
Very interesting. And then going back to our chat room, huge thank you from Melissa. Lots of thank yous from everyone in our audience. And Julia has another really interesting question. She says, I love your character's young voice in your books. I'm writing a fiction piece from 3 character point of views. Do you ever get lost in whose voice you're writing when you have more than one minor character? And how do you catch that?
So first off, Julia, yep, I sure do. I've in fact once got turned in something where my editor was like, I think you've changed characters here halfway through this chapter. So it's not just you. One of the things that I found that was helpful if you're doing kind of different points of view, which is easy enough to do, is consider changing the color of the scene to match the character. So if you're writing a scene from Cynthia's and it's her point of view, she gets it done in blue. And when you switch to Nicole's point of view, you're writing it in red and later in green. It actually provides a visual cue for you on the screen to remind you, right, I'm in Nicole's point of view. I need to make sure I'm staying in that focus. So that can be a really helpful way to do that. So that can be one thing. One piece of advice that's sort of about writing about different points of view, but is also about any question people may have, is when in doubt, don't worry about it. That is the beauty of revision and rewriting. And at that point, you can go back through with highlighters or Post-it notes, see my earlier comment about loving office supplies, and finding different ways to kind of target that. Sometimes I'll print out and I'll take out the dialogue attributions to see if I can tell who's talking just by what they say or how they say it. And if not, then I tend to think about that. But if I try and do that sometimes when I'm writing, I get caught. I think one of the biggest challenges, the more you learn about writing, sometimes the harder it gets. Like when you first sit down to write a book, you have no idea what you're doing and you don't know about rising action and conflict and character motivation and point of view, like passive tense, blah, blah. Like you just write. You don't know if it's right or wrong. You're just having fun telling the story. The more you know about writing, the more you're likely to sort of, glom down in those tiny details about what's working and not working. So just give yourself permission to write it, and then just know that you can fix it. That's the beauty.
Wow. Thanks, Eileen. This is wonderful advice.
I think we have enough time for one or two more questions. I do have one myself, and it goes back to that purpose thing. I think I'm just like really into the reflection right now, goal setting, purpose, living authentically. So what aspect of your writing career and being a published author, teacher, phenomenal speaker, by the way, reminds you you're living your purpose?
I think there's a few different things that come into that. And we're going to have to get together over martinis and have a big purpose discussion, because I'm really sort of fascinated with that as well at this point in my life. And I don't know if it's my midlife purpose crisis or having gone through some life changes in the past year, but thinking a lot about what is it I want to do. Because I worked with people with catastrophic injuries or illness when I was as a counselor, unfortunately, death came up a lot. And people talking about possibly facing much nearer end to things than they had wanted. So I think it is useful to think on that. Now, I, strangely enough, went to Catholic school, and I still remember, so kudos to Sister Melvina, who I had in grade 9. We were torturing her with the question of, like, if Hitler said he was sorry, could he still get into heaven if he was really, really sorry? And what did it have to do to get in there? And strangely enough, she asked a question. She said, at the end of the day, whether or not you get into heaven comes down to 2 questions. What have you done with the talents you were given? And what have you done with the time you were given? So regardless if you have any religious beliefs or not, I mean, I've been horrible about that myself. I'm much more likely to watch Netflix than to go to church on a Sunday. But I still think about those questions a lot, which is, I feel I've been given a certain number of skills and talents. And it took me a while to actually admit those to myself. See the earlier comment on lack of confidence. But one of the things that I know that I am good at is I'm a good storyteller. That doesn't mean I'm a great writer. It doesn't mean that, Margaret Atwood and I hang out and have tea or anything, although I'm open. But I'm a good storyteller, and I'm a good speaker. And I enjoy working with other writers, and I enjoy understanding what other people's stories are and trying to make them better. And because of that, I feel like that's why I'm here. That's my purpose. And I can tell it's my purpose because when I'm doing it, I feel more alive than any other time.
That's really beautiful. And I have to say, like, everything you just said is like kind of my experience of you. I get those things. I see those things.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think it touches on, as Cynthia and I were coming up with the kind of questions we wanted to ask, it went back to our own purposes and visions as well, where we value like authenticity. Basically, we wanted to know some of these deeper things, and it was a much easier time for us to come up with those questions. They just rolled right out because we were kind of living our own vision as well and values.
And if you're authentic, that comes out in your writing. I look at, when I even look over my own books, the books that were dealing with stuff that was important to me, that were issues that impacted me, those are the ones that resonate the most. And that doesn't mean, in case people are worried, I'm not a murderer yet. I have an ex, so maybe I'll switch over at some point. But so far, I've managed to stay out of the orange jumpsuit crowd. But when I deal with my own emotions, even if I'm putting those into a character that's very different than myself, that's when readers connect with those characters.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Eileen. You've been an amazing guest. So thank you very much.
Congratulations to you and Cynthia. This is a great thing, and I suspect it's going to be very popular.
Wonderful. We have our fingers crossed. So everyone listening, you can find Eileen next at the Whistler Writers Festival in October 18th to 20th, and also Surrey International Writers Conference, October 24th to 27th. You can also probably find her through the SFU Writers Studio as well, I imagine. Thank you to everyone who showed up today. This is our very first episode. You've made it successful along with Eileen. So our love is going out to all of you. Please do spread the word, like our Facebook page. Just to let you know, you will receive a thank you email from us tomorrow from BTK with the PDF from Eileen. This is the only email you'll get from us, and we'll pull that email from the registration list. We're doing this out of pocket, so if you've enjoyed the past hour and would like to make a donation, check us out at patreon.com, or you can donate one time through PayPal, even for the, as little as $2, half a coffee. We will be forever grateful, and that money will go towards actually this platform. Stay tuned for next month with Katie Wagner. We'll use the same format, featuring the short story, Writing Around the Holidays, in particular ghost stories, just in time for Halloween. Thank you all so much, and have a great evening.
Take care, everyone.